They laughed at her in daylight where everybody could hear it. The widow Beckett, out on her knees in the worst spring any of us could remember, pushing sunflower seeds into dirt that wouldn't grow a curse. Corn was what a body planted, wheat if you were greedy, beans if you were poor, but flowers, on good farmland in a dying year. I kept a book back then, every rain, every loss, every name that left the county for California. And I'll tell you something I never wrote down because I was too proud to. The day the sky turned the color of a bruise and came for all of us at once, the only patch of ground that didn't get up and fly away belonged to the foolish woman with the flowers. I've had 30 years to think on what that means. About who gets called foolish, and who does the calling, and how a person can be dead wrong about their neighbor right up until the moment they need her. So sit with me a while. Let me tell you about Cora Beckett, and the Apache woman the town wanted gone, and the storm that came to prove every one of us wrong. The first time I heard a grown man laugh at Cora Beckett, it was outside Halloran's store, and the wind was already carrying grit fine enough to taste. I was standing under the awning trying to keep my ledger dry, not from rain, God knows. We hadn't had rain worth the ink in 11 weeks, but from the dust that got into everything, that ground itself into the pages until my rain book read like a thing written in ash. I keep a book, always have. My Mary used to say I'd write down my own funeral if somebody handed me the date. Rainfall on the left column, losses on the right. In the spring of that year, the left column was mostly white space, and the right column was where I did all my living. Cora came up the road in her husband's old wagon, the one with the split tailgate Elias never got around to fixing before the dust took his lungs. She had the seed on the bench beside her, in flour sacks, and you could see from 50 feet it wasn't wheat. Wheat sits heavy. This sat light and shifting, and when Pruitt's boy, one of the Pruitts, they all looked like they'd been carved off the same mean stick, hollered out, "What have you got there, Mrs. Beckett, plantin' a garden for the Almighty?" She didn't so much as turn her head. That was the first thing I noticed about her that I hadn't bothered to notice in the 8 years she'd lived 2 sections over. She had a way of not turning her head that made the not turning louder than anything she could have said back. "Sunflowers," said Halloran, coming out to lean in his doorway with his thumbs in his vest like a man who owned more than a store. "She bought the seed off me herself, whole $1's worth." He said it the way you'd report a woman had bought a hat to wear to a hanging, and the men laughed because it was easier than thinking, and thinking was about the only crop doing poorly worse than wheat that year. I didn't laugh. I want to say it was on account of some decency in me, but the truth is my hands hurt too bad that morning to make a fist, let alone a joke. Arthritis. It comes for a man's grip first, so that a rope feels like a live snake and a pencil feels like a splinter. I stood there working my fingers open and shut, and I watched Cora Beckett climb down off that wagon, 40-some years old and widowed and alone, and haul a sack of sunflower seed over her shoulder like it was the most sensible thing in the county. Maybe it was, I didn't know yet. None of us did. But you have to understand what we'd done to the land, to understand why we were all such fools together. 10 years before, the rains had been good and the wheat prices better, and every man with a plow and a banknote plowed under everything that held the ground down. Buffalo grass that had rooted there since before Coronado, grass that gripped the dirt with a web you couldn't cut with an axe. We turned it belly up to plant wheat, because wheat was money and grass was just grass. The old-timers who'd run cattle warned us. "The land out here isn't farmland," they said. "It's rangeland wearing a costume." But the old-timers were poor and we were about to be rich, so we called them behind the times and we plowed. For a few years the land let us get away with it. Then the rains quit. By the spring I'm telling you about, the wheat was dead in the ground and the ground was loose as sugar, and every wind that came across the flats picked up more of what used to be our farms and carried it off to be somebody else's problem. We'd wake to find our own fields drifted up against the north fence like snow, brown snow, A man could lose 40 acres of topsoil in a night and find it 2 counties east by supper. And still, this is the part that shames me, still we plowed. We plowed the dead fields to plant new wheat because we didn't have another idea in our heads, and a plow is the only thing a farmer knows to do when he's scared. Cora Beckett had a different idea. She'd gotten it from a woman we didn't want in our county, and that made the idea worse than useless in our eyes. It made it an insult. The woman's name was Isha. I'll tell it the way I learned it, slow and out of order, because that's how the truth arrives when you're too dumb to ask for it plain. She was Mescalero, Apache. There was a reservation up in the mountains where the government had decided her people ought to stay, and by rights, the town's rights, not God's, she ought to have been on it. But Isha had been born on this flat before there was a town to have opinions, and her grandmother before her, and she'd stayed on when the rest were made to go, in a low adobe house down by the dry creek that the maps didn't bother to name. She kept goats. She knew every plant on that land the way I knew the columns in my book, knew which ones held water, which ones held soil, which ones you ate and which ones you left for the deer. She was old. How old I couldn't say. Old the way a fence post gets old, gray and hard and still standing when the fence is gone. The town's feeling about Isha was simple and ran downhill from Halloran, who wanted her land. That creek was the last wet ground in the section, and dressed up his wanting in the language of the day, which was that her kind didn't belong and never had. He said it enough times that men who had no reason to hate her hated her anyway, the way you'll pick up a limp from walking next to a lame man. There'd been talk. Ugly talk, the kind that starts as a joke at the store and ends as a fire in the night if nobody laughs it back down. I'd heard it and I'd said nothing, and I put that in no ledger, but I carried it. Cora Beckett had gone to Isha the winter after Elias died. Nobody sent her. She went on her own in the cold because she was out of money and out of ideas, and she'd heard the old Apache woman knew how to make ground give when it didn't want to. That was the whole crime of it. A widow, grieving and broke, went to the one person for 40 miles who might teach her how to live, and the town never forgave either of them, because the town had already decided that the correct thing to do was starve properly, among your own. I found this out because I was nosy, and because I was lonely, and because a man alone starts inventing errands that carry him past other people's houses. Late in April, I rode over Cora's way with no reason I could have defended, and I found her out in the field she'd planted, walking the rows in the last of the light. The sunflowers were up by then, not the great tall things you're picturing, just seedlings, a few inches, thousands of them in rows that ran crosswise to the prevailing wind, north and south, so the plants stood shoulder to shoulder against whatever came out of the west. I didn't understand the pattern yet. I thought she just scattered them any old how. It was only later I saw she'd planted them like a stockade, like she meant them to fight something. Isha was there, sitting on a stump at the edge of the field with a goat hair blanket over her knees, watching Cora work the way a foreman watches, which is to say by not lifting a finger. When she saw me, she didn't get up or duck her head or do any of the things the town would have wanted a woman like her to do at the sight of a white man on a horse. She just looked at me, took my measure, and looked back at the field. I have been looked at by a great many people in my life, and I have rarely been read so fast or filed away so completely. "Mr. Cawthon," Cora said, not surprised, wiping her hands on her apron. She had dirt worked into the creases of her knuckles so deep I don't think it ever fully came out, not in all the years after. "You come to laugh close up, or you got a real reason?" I'll be honest, the question knocked the wind out of whatever I'd meant to say. I hadn't come to laugh. But I hadn't come to help either, and there wasn't a third thing I could name, so I said the true thing, which surprised us both. "I come to see if it'd work," I said. "The flowers." Isha made a sound then. Not a laugh, she wasn't the laughing kind, or maybe she'd used up her portion, but a short breath through her nose, the sound of a person hearing the first honest thing all day. And she said something to Cora in Apache, low, and Cora almost smiled, and I stood there feeling like the only man at a wedding who couldn't dance. "She says you're the first one who asked will it work," Cora told me, instead of telling her it won't. But here is what Isha knew, that we didn't, that $1's worth of seed was trying to teach a whole county that was too proud to learn it. Sunflowers root deep, deeper than wheat, deeper than corn, deeper than most anything a man plants for money. That taproot goes down and down after water we can't reach, and while it's down there hunting, it's also knitting the loose ground together in a fist. Plant them thick in rows against the wind, and you build a living fence that slows the air before it can lift the soil. Behind that fence, in the still pockets the flowers make, other things can grow. Grass can come back. The dirt stays put long enough to become dirt again instead of dust. And when the season's done and the great heads hang heavy and black with seed, you eat. Or your chickens eat, or your birds, or your neighbors if you've got the heart. Isha's people had grown sunflowers on this ground for longer than there'd been a word for New Mexico. Grown them for food and for oil and for the yellow dye, and for the way the roots kept the good earth from wandering off. It wasn't foolishness. It was the oldest sense there was, out here, older than the plow, older than the bank, older than every man laughing at Halloran's store. But it looked like foolishness. That was the trap of it. It looked like a grieving widow planting flowers on a grave the size of a farm, and the town could not see past the looking to the sense underneath, because seeing that would have meant admitting that the woman they'd shunned and the woman they'd run out both knew something they didn't. I rode home that evening the long way, past my own dead fields, and I did a thing I hadn't done in a while. I stopped the horse and got down and dug my hand into my own dirt, the dirt I'd plowed 3 times that spring like a fool trying to make a corpse cough. It ran through my fingers like meal. Nothing held it. Nothing at all. I stood there in the failing light with a fistful of my own ruin sifting away on the wind, and off to the west I could see Cora's field, dark green against a sky going the ugly yellow-brown it went most evenings, and the sunflowers stood there, not moving even though the wind was moving everything else. That was the first night I understood I might have been wrong about something. It's a particular kind of cold, that understanding, when you're old enough that being wrong means you've been wrong a long time. I opened my book at home by the lamp and I wrote the date, and next to it, in the losses column where I put everything that mattered, I didn't write a number. I wrote 3 words, and then I sat looking at them a long while before I blew out the lamp. "They laughed today," I wrote, "God help us." I didn't know yet how many days of laughing were left. I didn't know the sky was keeping its own book in a bigger hand than mine, and that the account was nearly due. The trouble came before the storm did. The way it always does, trouble is the storm's outrider, sent ahead to see who's soft. It came on a Sunday in May, hot and still, the kind of stillness that isn't peace but a held breath. I was mending harness on my porch, which is a lie. I was watching the road, because harness was just the thing my hands did while my eyes did the real work, when I saw the dust of 3 riders coming up from town, moving with the loose ugliness of men who have had a drink to make a decision they couldn't make sober. They turned off toward the dry creek, toward Isha's. I want to tell you I knew right off and rode to help. I didn't. I sat on my porch with a harness strap in my ruined hands, and I told myself it wasn't my business, the way I'd told myself 100 times, and I got about halfway through believing it before something turned over in my chest and made a liar of me. It was Cora's field that did it, I think. A man can't watch a widow build a stockade out of flowers and go on believing nothing's worth defending. I saddled up, my hands screamed at the girth, I went anyway. By the time I got to the creek, Cora had beaten me there, and she'd beaten the 3 men there too, and she was standing in front of Isha's door with a shotgun she plainly did not know how to hold. I'll never forget the picture of it. Prewitt and 2 others I won't name because their grandchildren still live here and it wasn't their sin. Halloran wasn't among them. Halloran never was when it came to the doing. He was the kind that lights the match and stands back to warm his hands. The three men on their horses, and the widow on foot between them and the door, holding Elia's old scattergun crossways like a fence rail, and behind her in the doorway Isha, not hiding, standing in full view with her chin level, which somehow made the whole thing worse for the men, because it's hard to feel righteous about running off someone who won't do you the favor of looking afraid. "This ain't your fight, Cora," Pruitt was saying as I rode up. "Woman like you oughtn't mix in it. It ain't decent." "Decent," Cora said. Just the one word, turning it over like she was checking it for rot. "You want to talk to me about decent, Elmer Pruitt? You can start by telling me which of you was decent enough to bring my wood in the week my husband died, or milk my cow, or say one Christian word to me before this old woman did. She's the only soul in this county that treated me like I was worth the trouble of keeping alive. So no, I don't guess I'll be moving out of the way." Nobody said anything for a spell. The horses shifted. A goat bawled somewhere down by the creek, absurd and ordinary, and I remember thinking how strange it is that the worst moments of our lives happen in front of goats and flies and all the small business of the world that doesn't stop to watch. I brought my horse up alongside, and I did the only thing I could think to do, which was make it 3 against 2 instead of 3 against 1, and hope the men could count. "Elmer," I said, "you're a long way from your own troubles, common, all the way out here to make some." Pruitt looked at me the way you look at a man you've known 30 years who's just become a stranger. "You in this too, when? With them?" And there it was, the word that did all the work in our county in those days. Them. Not her, not those 2 women, but them, the great cold category a man could pour any hatred into and never fill. I sat my horse, and I felt the whole town's weight leaning on that one small word, waiting to see if I'd hold it up or knock it down. "I'm in it with 2 women who never done you a lick of harm," I said, "against 3 grown men who ought to be ashamed. If that's a side, then yeah, I'm on it." But they didn't burn her out that day. I'd like to say it was our courage that turned them, mine and Cora's, but I think it was simpler and less flattering than that. 3 men who have had a drink to work up their nerve will go home when the nerve wears off, and it wears off faster with witnesses. They said the things men say to leave with their pride: "This ain't over, and you'll wish you'd stayed clear of it, and worse." And they turned their horses and went, and the dust of them hung in the still air a long time after, refusing to settle, like the day itself couldn't let go of what had almost happened. When they were gone, Cora's arms started to shake, then all of her. She set the shotgun down against the adobe wall very carefully, the way you set down a thing you're afraid you'll drop, and she sat down right there in the dirt of Isha's yard and put her dirt-creased hands over her face and shook. Not crying, exactly. Something past crying. The body letting go of a fear the will had held clenched too long. Isha came out then. Got down beside her, slow, an old woman's slowness, her knees telling on her, and she didn't put an arm around Cora or say soft words. She just sat close, shoulder to shoulder, the way she'd sat watching the field. And she said something low in Apache, and this time Cora didn't translate, and I understood I wasn't meant to have it. Some things aren't for the man who showed up at the end. I turned my horse aside and gave them the yard. I have thought about that moment more than almost any other in my long life. 2 women the county had thrown away, sitting in the dust together, holding each other up with nothing but nearness. I had come to be the hero of it, God forgive my vanity, and I ended up the audience. It was the best thing I ever failed to be. But Cora paid for that day. The town made sure of it. Halloran called in what she owed at the store. She'd been running a tab like everyone on the promise of a crop. And there was no crop, there'd be no crop, and now there'd be no more credit either. The bank, which is to say Halloran's cousin, took a sudden interest in the note on her land. Word went around that the widow Beckett had taken up with the Apache and turned against her own, and in a hungry year, that kind of word travels like fire in stubble. Folks who might have hired her to sow or put up preserves found reasons not to. The county closed around her like a hand. And here's the thing I need you to understand about Cora Beckett, the thing that made her more than a sad story. She did not fold. She did not go to Halloran and apologize and buy her way back into the town's good graces with a bag of Isha's seed and a story about how the old woman had bewitched her. That would have been the easy road, and plenty would have taken it. Cora dug in. Every insult, every closed door, every whispered them just drove her taproot deeper, the way her sunflowers were driving theirs, down past the reach of anything that could hurt her, into whatever water was left down there in the dark. She spent that summer thin. I know because I watched, and because I started leaving things on her fence, a haunch of the hog I killed, a sack of my own dwindling flour, and she took them without a word of thanks, which was its own kind of thanks, the kind that says I'll take this because you need to give it, and we won't make a fuss. Isha helped her too, quiet, sharing out the goat's milk, and the desert food the town didn't know was food. Between the three of us and the flowers, that woman survived a summer designed to kill her. The morally heavy thing, the choice I promised you, though I didn't promise it in those words, came in August, and it wasn't a choice about the men, or the town, or even Isha. It was about the seed. By late summer, Cora's sunflowers had come to their full glory. 9 feet tall, some of them, faces the size of dinner plates and hanging heavy, gone from yellow to that dark ripened gold that means the seed set. She had, growing there behind that living stockade, more seed than she could eat in 3 winters, enough to plant her whole quarter section the next spring, enough to trade, enough to be, for the first time since Elias died, something like secure. That seed was her future. It was the only future she had. In that August, the Voss family, down past the schoolhouse, ran out of everything. They had 4 children and a mother and a father who'd plowed himself into the ground trying to make wheat where wheat wouldn't come, and now they had a granary full of nothing and a garden of dead sticks, and 4 children with the wide, flat eyes hungry children get. They were not kind people. Voss had been at Halloran's store the day the men laughed at Cora. I'd heard his laugh in it. They had not lifted a finger for her, and they'd have driven Isha off the flat and called it good. Cora took them seed. Not a little, enough to plant and enough to eat while the planting grew. She loaded up Elias' wagon with the split tailgate, and she drove it down to the Voss place herself, past the schoolhouse where the whole town could see, and she gave away a good third of her only future to a family that had wished her ill. I was there when she came back. I'd taken to being at her place of an evening, mending things, and I saw her drive up in the last light with the wagon light and her face doing something complicated. Why, I said, just that. It wasn't a question a man had a right to ask, but I asked it. She was quiet a while, unhitching. Then she said, Isha gave me seed when I had nothing and I'd have starved without it. She didn't ask was I worth it, she just gave it. She looped the harness over the rail. Her dirt-dark hands were steady now, steadier than mine ever were. The seed doesn't know who deserves it when, it just grows where you put it. Seemed to me the least I could do was be as dumb as the seed. I didn't have anything to write in my book that night that could hold it. I tried. I sat with the pencil and the lamp in my aching hand, and in the end I just put her words down as best I could remember them, in the losses column, where I'd been keeping everything that mattered. The seed doesn't know who deserves it. I didn't know it yet, but that August choice was the hinge the whole rest of the story swung on. Because come the spring, when the sky finally made good on its threat and came for all of us at once, the seed Cora had given away would be the only thing standing between the Voss children and the grave, and the only thing standing between our whole broke, foolish, undeserving county and the end of it. But that was still to come. First we had to get through the winter, and first the storm had to arrive. Sunday, the 14th of April. I know the date because I've got it in my book, underlined so hard the lead near tore the paper. It came out of the north that afternoon like the end of the world, because that's what we thought it was. We'd had dusters all winter. Days the sky went brown and the lamps burned at noon, and you tied a wet rag over your face and waited it out. We were used to those, the way you get used to anything that doesn't quite kill you. But that Sunday afternoon was clear and almost warm, a mercy of a day, folks out and about. And then along the whole northern horizon there rose up a thing I have no honest words for, and I've had 30 years to look for them. A wall. Black-brown, boiling, 2,000 feet high if it was an inch, rolling toward us across the flat and eating the sky as it came. Birds flew ahead of it. Every bird in the county, low and desperate, and the strange, awful silence before it. And then the temperature dropped like a stone down a well, and then it hit. I have been in the dark. I have been down in a cave with the lamp out, and I have been out on the flat on a moonless, overcast night miles from any light. I did not know what dark was until that wall closed over my place, and the day became a thing I could no longer prove had ever existed. You could not see your own hand at your own nose. The dust came in around every window and under every door and down the chimney, and the wind screamed with a sound that got into your teeth. And I sat in my own house that I'd built with my own hands, and I did not know for certain that the house was still there around me, and I prayed. I'm not a praying man. I prayed. And I thought about Cora and Isha, 2 women alone against that in an adobe hut in a farmhouse with a split tailgate wagon in the yard, and I thought about the sunflowers, and God help me, in the middle of my terror I thought, it'll take the flowers too. It'll take everything. It doesn't care what holds. Nothing holds against that. I was wrong. I had spent a year learning to be wrong more gracefully, and I still had one great wrongness left to learn. The storm blew itself out sometime in the night. I came out at first light into a world remade. You have to understand what the black blizzard did to the plowed ground. All that loose farmland, all those dead fields we'd turned belly up 3 times over hunting a crop, it was gone. Picked up whole and carried off. My North 40 had drifted up against the fence line 8 feet deep, dirt that used to be somebody else's farm, and my own good soil was 2 counties gone, sifting down on some other fool's roof. The Prewitt place was scoured to the hardpan, down to rock, nothing left but the plow scars in the bedrock like the marks of a beast that had clawed at the ground trying to escape. Voss's fields the same, Halloran's the same, every acre of plowed ground in the county the same. Ruined. Not damaged, ruined in the old Bible sense, the sense that means it will not come again in your lifetime. I saddled up in that gray light with my heart in my throat, and I rode for Cora's, expecting the worst, and I came over the rise above her quarter section, and I stopped the horse, and I could not make my eyes agree with my head. Her field stood. The sunflowers were battered, leaves stripped, stalks bowed, heads hanging like men after a beating, but they stood. That living stockade she'd planted crosswise to the wind had done exactly what the old Apache woman said it would do. It had slowed the air, and in the still pockets behind those bowed and broken flowers, the ground had held. Where every other field in the county had gotten up in the night and flown away, Cora Beckett's dirt had stayed home. There was a drift against her west fence, sure, but it was other people's dirt, the county's dirt, come to rest at last against the one thing in 40 miles that would hold it. Her land was there. Her land was still land. And out in the middle of it, small in all that ruin, 2 figures were walking the rows. An old woman in a goat-hair blanket, and a widow in her dead husband's coat, going down the lines of broken flowers, lifting the heads to see which seed had survived. I got down off my horse. I did not ride down to them. I stood on that rise a long while with my hat in my ruined hands, an old man weeping in the dawn over a field of flowers, and I was not ashamed, and I have never once been ashamed of it since. The town changed its mind, of course. Towns always do, once the evidence gets loud enough to drown out the pride. They came to her that spring, hats in hand, the same men who'd laughed. They came because they had no seed and no soil and no idea, and she had all 3, and she had it because she'd listened to a woman they'd tried to burn out and planted a crop they'd called foolish. Prewitt came. Voss came, though his children were alive that spring on Cora's August seed, and he knew it, and it sat on him hard, and to his credit, the only credit I ever gave the man, he said so, standing in her yard, unable to look at her. Even Halloran sent word, though he was too proud to come himself, asking might he buy seed. Buy, as if it were his to buy. Cora gave it away, all of it near enough. Gave the seed and gave the knowing along with it, how to plant it thick and crosswise to the wind, how to leave the grass, how to stop killing the ground and let it heal. She stood in her field that it held when all the others flew, and she taught the men who'd laughed at her how to save themselves, and she did it without one word of triumph. I watched for the triumph. I wanted it for her, wanted her to have that one clean moment of I told you so. It never came. She just taught them, the way Isha had taught her, the way the seed teaches by growing where you put it and not keeping accounts. The county came back over the years, slow. It's grassland again in places now, run to cattle the way the old-timers always said it should be, and there's not a farm in it that doesn't plant a windbreak, and half of them don't even know why anymore, don't know it started with a widow and an Apache woman and $1's worth of seed. That's how it goes. The lesson outlives the memory of who taught it. Maybe that's mercy. Maybe it's just the way the wind works, carrying things off to be somebody else's, without a word about where they came from. Isha died 3 winters after the storm. I won't dress it up. She was old, and one hard winter was one too many, and she went the way she'd lived, quiet and on her own ground in the low adobe by the dry creek that the map still didn't name. Cora was with her. Cora was always with her, those last years, moved a cot into the adobe when the cold came, tended her the way you tend the one who taught you how to live. When it was done, Cora buried her down by the creek, on the wet ground Halloran had wanted, and she planted sunflowers on the grave, and every spring for the rest of her own life she kept them coming. The town never did give the creek land to Halloran. Cora saw to the note somehow. I never asked how, and she never said, and there are still some accounts a man's better off not auditing. The creek's Apache land yet. There's nobody left on it now. But it's not Halloran's, and it never will be, and if you go down there in August you'll find sunflowers gone wild along the water, 9 feet tall, faces to the west, standing crosswise to whatever's coming. I'm an old man now. Older than Isha was, I think, though like her I've lost the exact count. My hands don't hold a pencil anymore, so somebody else is writing this down as I say it, and I hope they're getting it right, and I hope they leave in the parts that don't flatter me, because those are the true ones. I still have my book, the old one. The rain in the left column and the losses in the right. If you opened it to that spring, you'd find the numbers I kept, the 11 weeks without rain, the acres gone, all my careful ruined arithmetic. And you'd find, scattered through the losses column where I put the things that mattered, the 3-word entries that weren't numbers at all. They laugh today. The seed doesn't know who deserves it. And the last one, the one I made them write bigger than the rest. From the morning I stood on the rise and saw her field still standing when all the world had blown away. I keep starting to tell you what it said, and I keep stopping, because I think you know. I think if you've come this far with me, sat with an old fool through his one true story, you don't need me to spell out what a man learns when the ground he was so sure of flies away in the night, and the only thing left standing belongs to the woman everybody called.